Professor Penina Mlama. She is a guru, or the Kenyan will call her Kingunge in her field. Yeye ni mwalimu wa chuo kikuu cha Dar es Salaam, ameshika nafasi mbalimbali chuo kikuu cha Dar es Salaam, ameishawahi kuwa mkuu wa idara, ameishawahi kuwa, kwa sasa hivi tunaweza kumuita naibu makamu mkuu wa chuo katika masuala ya elimu. Lakini pia wengine wanafunzi kama bado mpo mnamtambua kabisa kwamba huyu ni mwandishi. She's a playwright. She has written a lot of plays that we have all performed as students and that are being performed in school. Kuna Lina Ubani, kuna Hatia, kuna Pambo, kuna Harakati za Ukombozi, kuna Nguzo Mama. Naweza nikaendelea na kuendelea, siwezi kumaliza. Lakini not just that, she's also a practitioner of theater for development in Africa. She is the person, if you talk about theater in Africa, theater for development in Africa, her name comes up. Because she is an individual who has been pioneering to use art in terms of education and to use our own traditional art form in terms of education. Kwa hiyo anajulikana, kwa hivyo ni very defiant na very critical. Lakini hajaishia tu hapo, amefanya mambo mengi machache. Naweza nikasema pia ni co-founder wa program inaitwa Tuseme Girls Empowerment Program, ambayo inampa mtoto wa kike nafasi ya kuweza kujieleza na kujitambua ili aweze kufika kwenye ile ndoto yake ambayo ameipanga. So Tuseme Girls Empowerment Program, it's a program that empowers a girl child, and it's not just in Tanzania, it's all over Africa. And it's there where girls and boys learn about themselves in terms of confidence building, soft skills, so that they can attain the goals that they have set for themselves. But she's also been the executive director of what we call FAWE, Forum from African Women Educationalists, which is based in Nairobi. And the sole purpose, as she is an activist, is to make sure that the girls and women are able to attain what they wish to attain. Those are just few things about Professor Mlama, and she's also my teacher and my role model. Kwa hiyo asante sana. Kule pembeni kuna kijana machachari sana 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 sana. Nadhani amechukua fimbo kutoka kwa Professor Mlama, yeye ndio kaishikilia. Anaitwa Amil Shivji. Ni kijana ambaye anatumia filamu kama Professor Mlama alivyokuwa anatumia theater for development. Unaweza ukasema yeye anatumia filamu for development, na filamu zake nyingi zote naweza nikasema ni sinema ambazo zinaangalia matatizo halisia ya hapa kwetu. Nikitaja moja inaitwa Shoeshine, watoto wanasafisha viatu, lakini katika upana wake nani anayefutwa kiatu? Huyo mtoto anayefuta kiatu yeye ni nani? Kuna sinema inaitwa Samaki Mchangani, kuna Aisha, kuna T-Junction, na sasa hivi kuna hiyo inaitwa Vuta Nikuvute. Vuta Nikuvute ni sinema ambayo imeshinda zawadi nyingi sana. Ilienda Toronto na ni mara ya kwanza sinema ya Tanzania kuweza kuonyesha kwenye International Toronto Film Festival. Imezunguka kwenye festivals nyingi sana. FESPACO pia imeshinda katika kuangalia new directors in Africa. Kwa hiyo amefanya kazi kubwa, na Vuta Nikuvute kwa sasa hivi ipo Mlimani City. Kwa wale ambao bado hawajaiangalia, inachezwa na watu wanaenda kuiangalia. Lakini wiki iliyopita tu iliyoonyeshwa kwa wabunge na mawaziri, zaidi ya mawaziri na wabunge 200 waliweza kuiangalia na kuweza kuona thamani ya filamu katika kumtambulisha Mwafrika na kumtambulisha Mtanzania. Kwa hiyo sio tu kuangalia kama ni vitu vya burudani, lakini na vitu ambavyo vinajenga, vinatutambulisha na vinatupeleka mbele. Kwa hiyo naomba nisiseme mengi, nimeisha watambulisha vijana machachari. Naomba nikakae tutamsikiliza. Our first presenter will give a keynote address on the construction of African identity, the role of the art, culture, and language. And that will be Professor Mlama. Karibu sana, una dakika 20.
I think we should not allow students to introduce their teachers. Thank you, Mona, for your very kind words. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. When Professor Mkandala requested me to make a presentation on this topic, which is construction of African identity, the role of art, culture, and languages, I accepted. But a few weeks later, actually I thought I was crazy to accept this complex topic. But I couldn't backtrack. But I changed the topic a little bit because I realized that there is a session on language tomorrow. So I'm only going to focus on the arts. You will agree with me that African identity is a concept as complex as the African continent itself. You know, Africa consists of 54 sovereign states, each one with its own national identity, and each nation with a myriad of ethnic-based identities, sub-identities. Tanzania, for example, has 123. African identity has furthermore been polluted by foreign influences, including Arabic, British, French, Portuguese, Belgian, and American, emerging from the continent's subjugation to slavery, colonialism, capitalism, imperialism, and so on. And it is my contention that soon Africa may also have to contend with Chinese influence, considering the way Chinese is getting control of our economies and the way it is setting up so many Confucius schools, Confucius units in many of our universities. So when we look at all this, then we ask the question, so what is African identity? The answer to the question is further complicated by the fact that, in my opinion, a society's identity is constructed from that society's economic base and the culture that emerges and sustains its mode of production. For example, if we have a fishing community, that society will create a fishing culture, a fishing identity. The education system, the religion, language, behavior patterns, and value systems of that society will be directed at fostering a fishing culture, a fishing way of life, and will that way of life will therefore be the footprint of its identity. Sorry, I seem to have misplaced one of my pages. Please forgive me. I'm just sorting out my pages. Sorry. So I was saying a fishing community will create a fishing culture, a fishing identity. Now, African societies historically have been sustained by various modes of production, as we all know. Some societies have been based on farming, pastoralism, mining, and even as in the case of the Hazabe of Tanzania, hunting and gathering. So you have all these different modes of production which are producing different identities. In addition, capitalism has deepened its roots in all African countries and is breeding its own culture and its own identity. And some countries in Africa, particularly Tanzania, have rubbed shoulders with socialism, and some remnants of socialist culture and identity can also be traced. So what kind of African identity can the continent construct today? Because we've got all these complexities when you look at our historical background. We should approach that question by first asking where there has been any attempt at all to deliberately construct an African identity by African countries, either together as a continent or individually as nations. On the one hand, we can say the answer is yes, that there has been deliberate attempts to construct African identities. This is because once we got independence, the African nations had no option but to revive, to reassert, and to promote the African identities which the colonial powers had attempted to distort or even to wipe out altogether. Mwalimu Nyerere captures this situation, this sentiment very well in his presidential inaugural speech to Parliament in December 1962, where he justified the formation of the Ministry of Culture and Youth at that time by saying, and I quote, "Of all the crimes of colonialism, there is none worse than the attempt to make us believe that we had no indigenous culture of our own, or that what we did have was worthless, something we should be ashamed of instead of a source of pride." And then in trying to talk about identity in the same speech, he says, "To build a nation is not just a matter of producing tarmac roads, multi-storied buildings, luxury hotels, and so on. A country may have all those things and yet not observe admiration or respect. To build a nation in the true sense of the word is to build the character of its people, to build an attitude of mind which will enable us to live together with our fellow citizens of Tanganyika and of the whole world in mutual friendliness and cooperation." Measures by post-independent governments to assert the African identity included setting up of ministries of culture, setting up of museums and art schools to revive, to preserve, and promote their national cultural heritage and identities. Performances all over the world by national dance troupes, such as the Heartbeat of Africa from Uganda, it was very, very famous at that time, or the Joliba from Guinea-Conakry, publicized indigenous African dances and indigenous African artworks in the whole effort to try to promote African identity. Tanzania's establishment of the National Dance Troupe, which later evolved into the College of Art, as well as the Department of Theater of the University of Dar Es Salaam, which is the current Creative Arts Department, the one which was giving you all that beautiful music yesterday, were some of Tanzania's efforts towards the same goal. The assertion of African identity, the assertion of African identity developed into continental movements, such as that by African artists and writers, including people like Chinua Achebe, Ngugi wa Thiong'o, Wole Soyinka, Amos Tutuola, Taban Loliong, and many others. In addition, the Negritude movement developed into a continental movement, especially in the Francophone Africa, led by the then president of Senegal, Leopold Senghor. And Negritude emphasized the value and dignity of African traditions and African peoples and black pride, emphasizing that these must be emphasized. African languages such as Kiswahili in Tanzania or Amharic in Ethiopia and African literature found way into classrooms as African countries struggled to make their curricula more culturally relevant. It is true, however, a few years after the euphoria of independence had worn out and the challenges of socio-economic development started to weigh heavily on the shoulders of our leaders, the duty to construct national identity started to be left alone and largely ignored. As more leaders turned towards the pursuit of personal wealth and political aggrandizement, the zeal for national identity began to wane. Kalikali, a Sukuma dancer, captured this situation quite well in 1964 with this song, and I'll just give the translation. The song says, "We really got independence, the people of Tanganyika. Truly we are independent. They are giving thanks to independence, those ones with big jobs, the ones who earn hundreds month after month, but the growers of cotton have nothing to gain. We prepare farms, but we plant cotton, but the prices fall. This is not good. We are fattening other people, son of Mbagule. They are really eating. They are laughing and dancing and blowing their noses with handkerchiefs." The intensification of capitalism embraced by most African countries has sharpened the forces of exploitation and further divided the continent into distinct classes of the few rich and the majority poor. It is therefore difficult really to talk of an African identity today. Maybe we should talk of African identities, that of the haves and that of the have-nots. It is our contention that in any society structured along class lines, there are two types of identities. That of the dominant class or the ruling class, and that of the ruled and marginalized class. Power relations between these two classes are based on conflicting interests, the dominant and ruling class always striving to stay in power by exploiting and oppressing the people, while the ruled and marginalized class always fighting to free itself from bondage. It is such conflicting relations, both classes, in such conflicting relations, both classes use the arts. The one to dominate and the other to free itself from domination. While the dominant class promotes and patronizes art that helps to cement their power, the exploited and marginalized use the arts as a tool to protest and struggle against injustices and to assert their existence as a people. Africa's ruling class has indeed used the arts to prop up their regimes. This class is very much aware of the power of the arts because they have used them in their struggles for independence when, together with the African masses, they were fighting one enemy, the colonial power. In Tanzania, for example, TANU at that time used indigenous dances like Beni, Lele Mama, Gombe Sugu, Mkwaju Ngoma extensively, and in many other dances to support the struggle for independence. For example, there was this song in Kilosa district which was composed to protest the land grabbing by European settlers, and this is what it says. King George, King George, King George was the king of England at that time. King George, he surely is, forgive the language. King George, he sure is uncircumcised. The king who rules from far. Let go of Mandege. Let go of Itumba. These are the areas which were taken, grabbed by the settlers. Let go of Mandege, let go of Itumba, or else come yourself and hold the bow and arrow and meet our mighty warriors. King George, he surely is uncircumcised. It is reported that this song was defiantly performed in front of a colonial district commissioner one time, and when the district commissioner asked what the song was about because he didn't understand the language, they told him it was in praise of King George. Liberation movements in Southern African countries, particularly ZANU in Zimbabwe, MPLA, Angola, Frelimo, Mozambique, SWAPO in Namibia, and the ANC in South Africa, also extensively use the arts to rally support for their armed struggle all over the world. The Pungwe in Zimbabwe, for example, which is a Shona night-long ceremony of dance and feasting, was secretly used by guerrillas to recruit fighters and mobilize support for the struggle against the Smith regime. The Toi Toi dance in South Africa was effectively employed to provide rhythm for mass demonstrations